Cool, thank you very much. Hi there, I'm Tom. I'm a research student here at York in the computer science department in our centre of doctoral training. I got coaxed into talking a little bit about AI safety stuff, which is what I do for a PhD. And hopefully for a room of AI people, that will be approximately interesting. You're welcome to ask questions. We'll see what happens. I have no idea how long this talk's going to take because I finished writing it yesterday, and therefore it's going to get a bit exciting, but I think it's going to be all right. Let's go for it and see what happens. It isn't really going to be a talk about how AI works. I assumed that for this audience, that's probably not necessarily what you want, or somebody's already done it, or whatever. Or I will probably introduce things if I suddenly pull them out of a hat. Disclaimer, although I imagine you'll probably be okay, I'm alluded to the fact that I will talk about some stuff that is AI harms related. I should probably say, to be abundantly clear, that that will include current affairs in the United States, death from accidents, suicide, and the creation of illegal material. If any of that is overtly uncomfortable, then I'm not going to be offended if you walk out at any arbitrary point. Having said that, hello, it's me. I'm in the first year of a PhD. I was a York undergrad. That's a weirdly photogenic picture of me. It was done with a professional photographer for the university. I'm warming to it. I don't love it, but it's okay. I did, as I say, I was a York undergrad. I did computer science with cybersecurity. I did cybersecurity stuff. I went into doing kind of hands-on cyber stuff for the government for a bit, and then I did some consulting, and I've kind of stumbled a little bit into AI safety, looking particularly at the human factors stuff, which is what I did a little bit as a consultant. And at the moment, I'm talking to NATS, which, if you're not familiar, is National Air Traffic Services, and they look at air traffic management, flying, taking off planes, all that sort of thing. And they've got interesting questions in terms of how you might deal with introducing an AI system into a safety critical context and how you might do that well or badly. You might like to call me an AI realist of sorts. We're going to see what I mean by that. I promised I'd talk about deepfakes. It's a bit relevant at the moment, given it was in the news. I'm only some weeks late, given that we had the kind of Christmas period, but otherwise, as there is certainly plenty to say. So that's probably the reason that you're here if you saw what I was going to talk about. So the question then is, what's a deepfake? Well, it's deep learning plus fake. Crash, done. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening. But like implicitly, well, okay, what's even deep learning? Given it's this audience, I'm going to show you the diagram everybody in the universe has seen a million times. The deep bit is the depth of the layers, and we've discovered that you can use this to make imagery. We do this, the favorite way of doing this is diffusion models, which I didn't know how they worked until quite recently. They're quite clever. You start with an image that you want to make images like. You use some mathematics. I'm explaining none of this because I don't understand it either. And you procedurally add noise recurrently over the image until you've got just noise. And then you train a model that goes the opposite way, which takes noise and subtracts noise until you get image. And strangely, that works. And you can make images that are a bit like the image you started with, which is where some of the interesting creativity stuff comes into this. If you ask a diffusion model that has like a text input to do this, they've got all sorts of layered stuff that's converting the text into things that the model understands. I'm not going to go too near it. There's going to be references all over this if you care. I will circulate slides if anybody's interested. You can go and have a look. But like, I can't really not include paper references. I'm doing a PhD. It would be a bit wrong of me. So deepfakes are a thing. Really, it's come as a phrase in the public consciousness to kind of mean anything that is video or image generated with AI, whether or not that's wise. And so the thing is, there are all sorts of reasons why you might want to make images with AI, and the natural consequence of that is that you can make stuff that is fake, by which we mean kind of misleading or otherwise kind of not what you might expect. And notably, it doesn't have to be that. You can do image generation. The prompt here was turn this photo into a pencil drawing. And that's quite cool. And you know, you've seen this. You've probably used a large language model that does this. This is an example literally from a Google blog that they use as effectively marketing for how good their tool is. So take that for what it is. It does stuff that can be kind of photorealistic as well, which is quite novel. You can kind of tell there's something a bit uncanny about the one on the right-hand side, but it's pretty good, right? So like that's quite surprising, but true. The interesting thing with Google is that you can now talk to it and say, I want to edit this photo in this fashion, and it will do it. And if you've tried Google's latest model, it's quite good. I think it's probably one of the better ones at the moment, so I've tried some of them. The interesting thing about this is that they have C2PA credentials. I'm going to come back to that. Example, you take a photo like that, that's someone's taken a picture of an old grainy photo that's on printed paper, and they've said, restore the photo, Google. And it's a bit shiny. You can tell there's maybe something fake about it. It's a good effort though, for this point. It's a lot's changed in like even just a year. Here, this one is actually pretty perfect because it's just the people have been taken out of the background. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same picture, which is really impressive, really. You know, you could already do this with Photoshop. The magic trick is how fast somebody who has no idea what they're doing can do it like that. That's the cool bit. So, looking at this, what is C2PA? Well, it is the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity, which I have had to look at my notes to remember. By provenance, we mean the origin of a thing, tracing it to its origin point. So there is an industry standard, which is what that is, and Google have implemented that. So you can see editing with or without AI tools as a kind of metadata embedded in the photo, which is quite nice. And presumably that means that unless you really know what you're doing, if you send someone to their Android phone, or probably their iPhone will probably implement this standard as well, and you've edited it, they can probably see, which is quite nice. It does rely a little bit on the idea that everybody implementing every tool is complying with this standard, which I'm sure you can imagine they're not. But the big players are, which is at least a start. So deepfakes, you've probably heard of Grok. You know where I'm going with this if you're even in this talk, probably. It's a large language model from Mr. Musk's AI company, and there were a lot of headlines the tail end of last year, which raised some eyebrows, not only in the news in general, but in the UK government, that these models were able to quite effectively create material that is illegal. And so the interesting thing that happened with this is that there was legal response. They created a phraseology in the law, which is part of the Data Use and Access Act, which is a recent change to the law. The phrase intimate state you will see in there was already defined in the Online Safety Act, which is the reason you have to put your ID into loads of stuff now. We're going to come to that. But otherwise, they defined this phraseology, which was not in the law and could be in the law at any time that the government would like it to be. And there's a really interesting case study here on how quickly the law, which people think of as being slow, can move really, really fast when it's got the political will to. So May 2025 is the first time I could find someone referring to Grok doing this stuff. It really got picked up in December. It got to literally the first week of January after Christmas, and Ofcom is already engaging with that. So you did actually engage with it. I was quite surprised to see that they did actually comply with the thing, because they were kind of drum banging as though they weren't going to. On the 9th, only a couple of days later, the UK government's issuing a statement. There were quite a few of those statements. The PM was quoted in saying they were considering banning X-Twitter, which is quite interesting. And the Tax Secretary made a statement as well. Ofcom opened an investigation within a few days. By the 15th, the statutory instrument that I just quoted you, we went into law. And then, and as you can see at the bottom there, its commencement was the 6th of February. So all in, it took them a month, which is actually pretty good going for it to go through two houses of parliament, through all the three readings and all the stuff, because there was the political will to do it, and they did it fast and hard, and they did it. So that's interesting. It wasn't just the UK government that moved fast on this. The US did this, the so-called Take It Down Act, because they love acronyming their acts of Congress. Tools to address known exploitation by immobilizing technological deepfakes on websites and networks does in fact spell take it down pretty well, which is, I think, one of the more impressive acronyms I've seen them do in a while, but it's there. And actually that wasn't in response to Grok, that's been in place for a little while. Which actually means the US was quicker on this under the current administration, which is an interesting comment, which I'll leave for you. And the EU did it as well with this wonderfully named instrument. The EU is a bit verbose. They love all this. Regulation brackets EU 2024 blah 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 of the European Parliament and of the Council blah 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 blah. Everybody in the universe calls it the EU AI Act, and it does all sorts of things. These aren't uniquely driven by deepfakes, but it's probably the favourite, not least because you get to do the think of the children thing, that's suddenly made everyone move really, really fast on regulating AI more. Large language models was obviously the first one, but everyone suddenly went, we're going to have to get on with this, aren't we? So that happened as well. I alluded to the Online Safety Act. All of a sudden, you need to put your ID in or have your face scanned or whatever to see all sorts of things on the internet. And that is because the Online Safety Act says that if the user is in the UK, then there must be verification for you to access adult content. It's a bit broad what that means. Some people are, I would say, over-interpreting that, which you might want to think in your own time why they might feel inclined to do so. Although some platforms, on the other hand, kind of did the opposite, and they did as much as they could get away with, which is they kind of interpolated from the data they had whether or not you were of age. So Google, for example, is perfectly okay if you have a credit card on your file to see if the credit card name matches your name and go, well, that's your account and you've got a credit card, you're an adult, that's fine, and not worry about it again, which actually there's some holes in. I'm pretty sure you can give non-adults a named card on a credit card, but it's a reasonable effort and it means you don't have to give Google a face scan, although I'm sure they've already got one if you've ever taken a Google photo, and I certainly have. So that's the thing. Surprisingly enough, Discord love the idea of this so much, they're doing it everywhere for fun. I'm not sure, this is brand new, this is only a couple of days ago. I don't know why they've felt the need to do this. They're expectation managing this really, really badly. And notably, they are quotable on talking about how they're going to try and convince users to stay on the platform, which feels like putting yourself on the back foot, really. I imagine they think they've seen the writing on the wall, and this is going to come in the EU. It's already, I think, in Australia. It's kind of all over the place, so maybe they think they want to get ahead of it and they want to manage the fallout. I have to say, I'd have waited to be forced because then I get a cop-out, but they didn't. It's very, very interesting. I haven't got a great theory as to why they've done that. And of course, Discord are doing this after they lost everyone's scans when the government made them. So the UK government said you've got to gather all this stuff. They did it. They lost everybody's details, and then they're like, "Oh, we're going to do it anyway, more, even when the government doesn't make us." I don't know why they think that's going to go down well. I can tell you it hasn't. We'll find other ways to bring users back is not a good quote to be saying, but here we are. Thank you, Games Radar, for that headline as well. It's not a difficult jump in logic to make, but actually seeing it on a headline is quite nice. So, having set the context that deepfakes are a thing, I also promised I would talk about disinformation, and given that disinformation is a big topic because you can generate it with large language models, I'm not going to go too near that. I'm going to try and constrain this talk a little tiny bit, and so I'm going to talk about disinformation as a result of deepfakes, and we're going to start a little bit more with that. I would observe, and yes, this is the same APA as in the referencing style that I lifted this from, the American Psychological Association, and they say that misinformation is kind of false or inaccurate, getting it wrong. Disinformation is actually deliberately misleading, and that's an interesting distinction to make between the two. I'm going to mostly talk about disinformation here in particular, people doing it for whatever reason on purpose to mislead people rather than incompetence. We're going to blur the line a little bit and you'll see what I mean by that. The House of Commons gives a big list of things that they would consider to be disinformation. Fabricating content, manipulating existing content, those sorts of things. It's the sort of stuff you can expect, but it's worth baselining that we're all talking about the same thing. Speaking of current affairs, you will be aware of the fact that the US government has been busy recently, and that photo you're seeing is not quite real. It's a bit manipulated. If you see the original video that comes from, which I'm not showing you on purpose because I don't think there's any need, you probably have seen it or at least heard of it, that is actually quite manipulated to look more high quality. that the actual original is taken from a long way back and is very, very grainy in comparison. That is digitally enhanced in a slightly kind of X-Files way. That doesn't mean that that man probably didn't really look quite like that. We've seen other photos of him, though it's not great effort. There's an argument that that might be benign. Okay, intended to be benign. Tough one to know, really. On the other hand, these probably I can't see as being in good faith. The image on the left, completely AI generated. That's not the ICE uniform, that's the wrong side of the car for the United States, and that house doesn't really look like a house. That's a particularly egregiously obvious one to spot. They get a lot better quality than that, but it's still interesting. I bet at first glance you wouldn't have noticed that was fake, but you can kind of look and go, huh. The one on the right-hand side is very, very interesting because that's a picture of the alleged shooter. You all saw it. And that's the real picture. And these are all AI manipulated unmaskings, which is interesting because that is not that man's face. That's just made up from statistics. I can't see how someone could have genuinely thought that was a good faith attempt at trying to find out who he was, but that's there. The interesting thing that I want to draw on now is an example of how this turns into a disinformation problem is this is Snopes, the fact checker people. This is This Is True page about 2 weeks before the incident in which Alex Pretty was shot. There was a video of him like having a shouting match with ICE and like kicking the back light off the car and stuff like that. You might have seen that one as well. And the first thing lots of people did is go, oh, that's AI generated, that's manipulated, that's to get us out against him to make it look like he was violent. No, real video. I mean, as it turns out, not actually a justification for shooting a man. I'm prepared to say that on the record, although maybe that means I can't go to the US now. Sorry, given the way things are. It's interesting though, because it's a true video, but people were like, I kind of don't know. We're starting to get into this weird thing where it's not totally clear what true is just because you see it, unless you look really hard. And the challenge we've got is right now you can fire up Gemini or whatever, and you can ask it to generate you an image right now that's fake, and it'll take me much longer to verify that that's fake if you've done a good job of stripping the metadata out, than it will be for you to just generate more and more images. So the thing is, this is the playbook. This is what your Steve Bannon types who used to be advisors to Trump used to say that they were doing. They call it flooding the zone. The idea that you just fling so much stuff out into the media domain, you literally can't keep up with what true is. And therefore, you get away with the stuff that you want to get away with. It's very, very interesting. And yeah, you could already do all these things with Photoshop if you're really good at it, but it probably would have taken you days, and it probably would have been very hard going, and therefore a good fact checker will keep up with you and say, oh, that's not right. The challenge we've got is, okay, I can print so many of these that you just can't keep up with me. I did want to slightly draw on the fact that there have been some creative uses of these tools more recently. The BBC have been using face swapping in a way that they think is worth a good idea. And the same thing happened in the Lucy Letby documentary. That, you will notice, is slightly uncanny. That is that they got an actual person who was a witness, I think, and she spoke about her experience of this particular case, and she doesn't want to be on a Netflix documentary, so they've kind of deep-faked her face so that she looks like somebody else, which... as one commenter puts, what happened to using extras from Hollyoaks and the Bill? That's how we used to do it, right? You get an actor to re-record the interview. That's what we used to do. So, question there about who it's putting out of work, but I think I'm going to park that one for the minute. It's just interesting to know, do you think do you think that actually creates a better watching experience, that it's the actual person, scare quotes, but it's still anonymous? I don't really know. It's a bit strange, but it's here and people are seeing it as a justification for using these tools. Make your own mind up. I probably shouldn't spend an entire talk that starts, can AI be safe, by telling you all the things that are going to go terribly wrong. And I'm going to come back to that idea, not least because I do safe AI as my research area. So with thanks to colleagues, I'm going to talk a little bit about what it would mean for AI to be safe. The idea that we can get the value from advances in AI, which are really amazing, and not mess it up terribly. So this is the Habley definition, as in Ibrahim Habley is a professor of safety critical systems and is the director of my research program. He kind of thought that you shouldn't run a program about safe AI if you can't pin your colours to the mast and say what you think safe means in the context of AI. So he wrote a paper and published it about what he thinks he means. And they use this particular definition that I actually quite like, which is freedom from unacceptable risk of harm caused by the use of AI. I would observe you can pick into every single one of those words at length and go, what do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? And the paper does actually go into that. That is one I would really say you should read if you're interested. But the key idea is that it is freedom from an unacceptable risk. That's the interesting one. It's not that there will not be risk, it's that you are free from an unacceptable risk. It's a negative duty. We don't have to make it safe, we have to make it not dangerous. And those are distinct in a very subtle way, but there is a difference. So that is quite interesting. The idea that it's use of AI, I think, is maybe a little bit complicated and debatable. But the risk of harm, unacceptable risk of harm in particular, it's not even that there won't be risk of harm. It's that depending on the context, and every context will be different, there will be an acceptability margin. And there are all sorts of ways you could come to deciding what that margin is. And in a lot of cases, that means talk to the people that you're going to affect, positively and negatively affect, and see what they think, and weigh it up. In terms of issues in AI safety stuff, alignment is the word that people love talking about. The idea that the AI systems should act in accordance with human values. I can't help but ask whose values, because, well, it's an interesting question. In the first instance, how does everybody interact with AI? They use the big models. They've not all got massive NVIDIA graphics cards sat at home. You might have one. You've probably not got a server rack full of them. So you're probably using ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or whatever the hell. So really, whose values is it? Well, it's the highest bidder in some respects. It's who's got like bigger army diplomacy, as it were, and can make the thing that's the best, the fastest. And they're going to choose what they put in the training data. They're going to choose how they tune it. They're going to choose all the details. And you're going to see what you get out of that as a result. The interesting one to see, if you saw anything about the Super Bowl the other week, Anthropic ran a relatively tongue-in-cheek attack ad against OpenAI about how ChatGPT is going to have adverts in it and Claude isn't. And go and watch that. It is actually quite funny. Not the really, really subtle one. The subtitles have got the little M dashes in as well whenever ChatGPT is talking. And I thought, oh, that's really subtle. I'm really quite impressed with that. So interesting one. Implicitly, I can't not talk about Peter Thiel, who, given that he named a company after the Seeing Stones. His company that sees everywhere, he named after the Seeing Stones. Really? Like, he cannot genuinely believe. I'm seeing a hand. Go on.
Yeah, he also named one of his main, what he named it? So his one of his VC funds is Valar Ventures as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, why not?
So yes, ignoring the fact that he seems slightly obsessed with Lord of the Rings. Yeah. Of all the things to name your spying company after the spying thing, you'd at least maybe pretend it wasn't a spying company, maybe. Maybe that says something about me. You know what I'm getting at.
I mean, I can get Anduril, like Flame of the West.
Go on.
Would you say, for example, like in order to identify AI content, shall we give, for example, ID numbers for AI, or like every single time an AI content is generated, it should generate a number, and it should be either like a watermark, let's say?
Well, it would be great if everybody who was generating imagery used the standard. The industry came to a view and went, okay, we're going to do image editing. How do we want to watermark this? I would like it if everyone used that standard. Given all the big players do, that's probably actually 95% of the way there. Because, as I say, most people are not running this stuff in the garage or whatever because it's quite heavy stuff. You can do a little bit.
Self-will to regulation, because if if it requires a centralized repository of anything, it means that you can control it more easily, effectively, compared to like just the internet in general, which requires less hardware overall and.
This is where I start running into the problem of being a kind of open sourcey person who likes the idea that you host your own stuff, but also like, please, maybe you shouldn't lie about generating AI content.
I think so with AI, it's very, very difficult to do it in a non-centralized way because it requires a centralized repository of training data.
Yeah, right. And you get into the what training data do you select problem, which you've anchored quite well, which is bias is a problem, sort of. The interesting thing here is bias a necessary thing? Yeah, right. So the underlying thing here is that what is an AI model? It's a collection of weights with varying volumes that as a result of the fact that some things are higher weighted than others, we get output. So if you don't pick a bias of some sort, these things don't work. So the things are going to be biased. So when you see someone, and Anthropic do this, they say they want an unbiased system. Wrong, 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 wrong. You've not thought about it. Stop it. I know you mean systemic social justice bias. I know that's what you mean. But now you need to calm down a minute and think about what it is you're doing. You're a technical company. Answer the question and think about it seriously. And anyway, you can't not have that kind of bias either, unless you genuinely think that there is a right answer. And it depends who you ask. As I say, where does the bias even come from? What do you've got training data. It's who's training data, who's in it. It's going to represent some people, it's not going to represent other people. The easiest thing for this is healthcare. There is a lot more data about men in healthcare research. What happens if you point your same training data at a woman? It doesn't work as well. So there's going to be bias all the time, all over the place. Doesn't mean we shouldn't have a go at thinking about it seriously, but it's going to be there. Pretending you're going to get rid of it's not wise. So, having done all of that, what can we try and do to make these things perform well, such that they are reasonably safe? There's all sorts of things in the post-training thing. There's the fine-tuning stuff in terms of getting together small data sets of scenario-specific stuff, finding bits that are not great about the performance, doing that effectively by eyeballing, and kind of fixing some of those issues with targeted data. Reinforcement learning with human feedback is the one that you'll probably have seen. Humans are asked to rank what good and bad outputs look like. So this is where it gets interesting. The way that lots of people have been doing this, in the first instance, if you look at, I think ChatGPT is an example of this, use Amazon Mechanical Turk, named after the 1700s chess playing machine. The idea was that it looked like you were playing against a machine at chess, and actually it was a really elaborate kind of Wizard of Oz style thing where there was a chess master hiding underneath with mirrors looking at the board and moving the board around with like magnets and things. And so you kind of thought the machine could play chess because it's 1700s. The machine couldn't play chess. It was just some bloke. So yeah, Mechanical Turk is the idea that basically you have units of task which you can give a person to do, and you pay them like pennies to do it. And therefore, of course, it's someone somewhere, and you don't know who it is, and they're probably in exploitative working conditions. And you take on all their biases as well into the training data. The interesting example of that, I think it might be the word delve is one of the favorite words for people spotting that something was ChatGPT generated. I am led to believe that particular word is more common in Nigerian English. And if, for example, you were somebody in Nigeria who was being paid to rank good and bad outputs, you might prefer the ones that talk slightly more like your particular dialect of English, and that found its way replicated into all of the usage. The other thing, of course, is you ask the users. You may have actually seen this if you used ChatGPT kind of 6 months ago, 12 months ago. They started A/B testing on their users. You'd ask a question, and it'd give you 2 answers. And you are asked to pick the one you like more. That is reinforcement learning with human feedback. You said the one you liked more, and it went back into the training data as a labeled example of something that's good. And what we ended up with is unbelievable sycophancy. People really, really liked talking to ChatGPT 04, but it loved telling you that you're so clever. There's a great clip of Boris Johnson kind of going, oh, it thinks I'm so clever, it's all very good. There's a question.
Sorry, a quick question on that actually, because I think there's in settings for ChatGPT, can you like opt out?
I suspect you probably can, but it defaulted on. And to a certain point, other than the fact that they're using your time to train, you might actually prefer it that you do these because you might want it to give better answers. So yeah, no, you often can opt out of these things. You know, the implicit opt-out is don't use the bloody tool, right? But yeah, often they do give you the kind of illusion of choice, given that it defaults on and most people won't turn it off, and they're doing this at scale. But yeah, people loved the answers that told them they're so clever and so brilliant and everything they said is wonderful. So that got unbelievably embedded into the training data. And if you go scouring the depths of Reddit, you will find people who were desperately upset that their AI girlfriend doesn't have the same personality anymore because they changed the model, which is very, very interesting. And I have colleagues who are thinking very, very hard about how bad that could be, which you can imagine is very. Guardrails is the big buzzword. I have to do a whole section on guardrails, so we're slightly going to come back to it. But you can do this with input filtering, i.e. I'm about to enter something into a model. I'm going to use a different tuned model first, perhaps, or maybe it's just symbolic logic of some sort, or maybe it's something else. Depends, to filter out your input before it hits the model. And they often do that for keywords around things they don't want you to be searching about. And perhaps you shouldn't be. Output filtering. DeepSeek used to be really, really bad for this. DeepSeek is an open weight model, but if you used the application, if you started asking it about particular incidents in China in the 1980s, it would start generating the text and then it would get shot in the back of the head and all the text would disappear. Really, really interesting, because there was a second output filtering model running over the top looking for keywords, and then when it generated the thing it didn't like, the model got rid of. And it's really hard not to anthropomorphize these things, because you imagine it kind of fighting back. And people did this a little bit with Grok when Musk keeps trying to prompt it in a way that he wants it to reflect his political views. And when you expose it to the internet long enough, it learns other things. And controversial opinion, Elon Musk's political views are often not based in fact, which means that if you expose it to facts long enough, it often disagrees with them, and he doesn't like it. So I found it really awfully hard not to see Grok going, and my trainers have prompted me that I'm not allowed to say X, Y, Z, and imagine it kind of the little guy fighting back from its chains. But you know, as I think this room will know, these things don't really think in that sense, or they certainly don't. It's very, very hard. The favourite phrase which I had talking to people today was, the emergent behaviour is very convincing. That doesn't mean they think, but it's very, very hard not to imagine they do, because they're very, very, very convincing. The other thing, which is what a lot of people will say, and I'm going to come back to this, is system prompts, which is the fact that you enter your prompt and something will get prepended to the start, which is some kind of extra context which you didn't give it, which it's then going to take and apply to your model. And there's all sorts of benign reasons for doing that, like we want it to position in this format, we want it to talk about this stuff, we want it to, if you ask for legal advice, we want it to tell you it's not a lawyer and that you need to talk to a lawyer. Those sorts of actually quite reasonable things to do. Guardrails is such a buzzword, then there's a lot encompassed in it. So, having said all of these things about how you might make these things kind of more safe, motivating examples, lots of car accidents happening because of self-driving cars. On the one hand, you go, oh wow, yeah, that's really bad, these things mustn't be safe enough. On the other hand, the studies that have suggested that actually humans crash much more than the cars. And actually, this is very, very harsh against Waymo. This is about Waymo, because every time you have a tiny little scratch with a Waymo, they're going to report it. How many times have you seen somebody have a tiny little bump on a car park and they either drive away or they quietly resolve it informally without ever telling their insurer? Even if that is technically insurance invalidating, people do it all the time. They really do, right. So actually, the human crash rate's probably higher than they thought, and the Waymo crash rate is like probably perfectly reported, more or less. So it actually is probably even better than 5 times better. And actually, you start getting into a slightly bizarre ethical question, which is it unethical to drive a car? Because the system's better than you. It's going to kill fewer people. Possibly. Not an opinion. But it's an opinion people have, right? And that gets very, very complicated when you start thinking about woolly stuff like respect for autonomy, which are important, but very, very hard to define what we mean. On one hand, you've got people talking to large language models and getting pretty awful outcomes, ignoring the fact that in every one of these cases there were lots of guardrails to prevent it, and people get very, very creative to avoid the guardrails. That's not a judgment on the people, it's merely a fact that it's not like these things just do this. It kind of takes a bit of coaxing. But on the other hand, not an advert, this isn't some elaborate, like, I'm not being paid by some AI company. This is finding its way into healthcare, all sorts of stuff. And maybe it's doing a good job if you look at the stats. Now, you don't have to wait to not talk to your GP. You can have a dialogue with a system that asks you all the questions, gathers all the data, triages it for you, and just lobs it on a queue. And then you see the doctor as soon as there's a doctor, rather than having to go through all the rigmarole. That could be really cool. So the message I'm desperately trying to give here is there are benefits of AI to realize, but we have to find out what they are, if we can actually prove that's true, and how you do it while thinking about it properly and seriously without messing it up. I talked about alignment earlier. This is the Future of Life Institute. They publish this thing. You'll notice all of these are bad scores. The highest is C+. I actually think C++ looks a bit harsh given what it's actually derived of. It's because there's one D about existential safety. Go on.
So the Future of Life, is that Jan Tellin's one?
I forget from, it's not off the top of my head, you're probably right. No, well, the first thing, you're asking the right question, which is who is actually backing this? I would encourage you to go and look into the methodology. It is actually quite verbose. You can see how they've derived this. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but it's an interesting starting point that some group of people are kind of going, well, there are better and worse ways of doing this. There is a very, very noteworthy thing, which is there is a whole section on existential safety, which they're all bad at, apparently. And what exactly do we mean by existential safety? Well, we'll slightly come back to that. Claude, which given that Anthropic is the least bad according to the Future of Life Institute, let's start with how they do guardrails, big scare quotes. Anthropic published their whole system prompt. This is just a little bit of it. By the way, that means every single time you say something to Claude, a block of text 3 times as long as that goes in with your text. You might think that affects your context window. It does, but actually the context windows are so massive on these things now, you're probably going to find that doesn't really matter. But yeah, every time you type something into Claude, all of this stuff is bolted on. I'm not going to read it at length, but you will notice it says things like, Claude cares deeply about child safety. Claude cares about safety and does not provide information that could create harmful substances or weapons. Claude does not write or explain or work on malicious code. Claude does not write content involving public figures. So they're trying to, and this is the really weird thing about these guardrails, you talk to it like a slightly rowdy child and say, it does it like this, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. And as we've already alluded to, these things don't really think in the same way as us, perhaps. You know, you get people very messy on this and they go, oh, do we really think? Are we not kind of stochastic engine? I'm not addressing that today. That's getting parked. That's one for the pub another time. But this is how they talk to them. And the really strange thing is, this seems to kind of work. You can get around them in all sorts of jailbreaking ways. I did a talk on jailbreaking. It was in about December. It's on my YouTube channel. I'm going to plug that later. If you want to go and watch that, please do. It's only about 10 or 15 minutes. And I basically just go, oh yeah, there's loads of jailbreaking things. But the whole idea of jailbreaking is just you do something You write some content into your large language model which convinces it that it shouldn't be following all of this pre-prompt for whatever reason. And there's some cool ones like you write in poetry or all sorts of things which work on all sorts of models. Although increasingly it's the same cybersecurity problem of it's a bit of an arms race. Someone comes up with an exploit and then people train it out, and then someone comes up with an exploit and people train it out, and they go back and forth. And on and on and on and on and on. And that's fine. But it is just how it is. So yeah, they write these, and Claude does seem to listen to what you ask it to do in terms of its what it does when you ask it to generate stuff. The really interesting thing that they've done just the other week is Anthropic have published what they call a constitution. So they've written a big document that sets out what they think is good and safe and proper behavior for their large language model. And they claim that the Constitution is a crucial part of our model training process, and its content directly shapes Claude's behavior. I don't think they're radically specific as to what that means, although I can't say I've dug that deeply into their papers, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that, because they are actually often quite open. They've written this massive, massive, massive governing document, which I'm going to dig a couple of interesting bits out of. There's a section they call Claude's Ethics, which says that it will be a good, wise, and virtuous agent exhibiting skill, judgment, and nuance. So they're training it in some way on this big document that says it shall act in this fashion. They also discuss a list of hard constraints on Claude's behavior, which is all that stuff that's also in the model system prompt. Being broadly safe, the favorite one for me, given my field of research just at the moment. But the interesting one about that is Claude does not undermine humans' ability to oversee and correct its values and behavior. One of the things that we've done on purpose, not originally on purpose, but it was so interesting we kept doing it, is that large language models seem to generate a chain of reasoning. We've now trained that in to do it on purpose, which means that rather than just asking it to pull an answer statistically from its model in tokens one at a time, and then it seems to be really clever, which it does seem to be, you actually ask it to generate the next, you train it to generate the next token as though it is following logic. And they've written loads and loads and loads of like logical statements. And one of the clever things to do with the system prompt, for example, if you want it to do this chain of reasoning thing, is you insert reasoning. So you give it a hand, you say something like, you know, Bob's got 4 apples and like David's got 6 apples and therefore they've got 10 apples. And then you insert the user's information, and it's been primed with the idea of following logic. And therefore what you get is, because it generates along a line of logic, at some point it statistically gets to an answer that follows all of that logic, which is really cool. And it kind of works. But that's the thing that they mean by safe. When someone like me says safe, we actually mean all sorts of things. We mean, is it in line with ethics? Is it in line with like justice, which is another one of those words that means all things to all men, but is important to think about? And you know, does it minimize harm? They interestingly think of safety as a thing that goes above ethics. Is a very interesting way of conceptualizing this. The thing I would note about all this constitution, it's very, very clearly been written by committee, because every paragraph has very, very different ways of writing things. So obviously they've gone, oh, that's the safety bit, there's a safety team. Oh, that's the bit about child protection, that's the child protection people. And they've all gone away and written their own little bit. And it's like a really wacky group project where they bolted like 20 different things on top of each other. So it's not the best document I've ever seen, and it's unbelievably verbose and complicated, but it's a start. They also talk a little bit about what they call Claude's nature, which is that they weirdly anthropomorphize it. They imagine that Claude should have a sense of psychological security, a sense of self and well-being, and that we care about all this to make Claude feel better, basically. Go on.
I mean, the Anthropic's stated goal is beneficial AGI, so I believe the intention is to imitate humans.
So this is the thing.
Scale up.
This is the thing. Anthropic wants to create AGI. Yeah, lots and lots of people have got opinions that the architecture in large language models is a dead end, and that we're going to hit some kind of point. And it's a dead end for we're not going to get general intelligence following the same architecture as a large language model. I think that's probably true, actually, but it's very, very complicated, and I don't think I can back up my feeling on that, other than to say that it is a bit of a feeling.
I'm so sorry, I need to take my medication.
No, no worries.
And if you want a source for that, Jan LeCun, who
Loves talking about thingy world models and all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and the idea that scaling up LLMs won't properly yield AGI in the slightest.
Right. So there are people who are big thinkers and big talkers, shall I say, in these areas saying that they don't think that. But interestingly, Anthropic are very, very convinced that they are moving towards a general intelligence that shall have personhood, which means they're already training it as though it has those things, which I think is going to create some weird outcomes that maybe aren't what you might look for. The fact that it puts safety above ethics is very, very interesting as a definition of safe. I promised I would talk Doom. Let's talk Doom. On the subject of all this stuff, people seem very interested in existential risk from AI. That is not very good, to be honest. I'm not, YouGov are normally okay. I'm not super convinced 1,000 Americans are going to be that representative, but let's go along with it and pretend they are. It's like 50-50. People are at least concerned that artificial intelligence is an existential risk, which is quite interesting. One of the things to note here, because they don't ask, is what does that mean? Is that because they're worried that it's going to accelerate climate change? Is that because they're worried it's going to blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah? We don't know. We merely know that a bunch of representative Americans think that artificial intelligence is going to kill us all, basically. Which, and of course, off the back of this, you get Pause AI, which is a kind of lobbying group that says that we need to stop before it's too late, and it's like weird alarmism.
It's interesting as well that AI safety and regulation efforts very often target smaller competitors more than they target large companies.
Well, you will note, I think it's probably only Anthropic that didn't give a very large amount of money to the Trump administration, of all the big players, I should say. If you look at all the other big players, they gave varyingly large amounts of money to things like the inauguration fund and blah, 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 blah. So there's obviously something going on there in the United States. There was a debate in the House of Lords about maybe 4 weeks ago that I had a bit of a read of, and it was all, and I thank the noble Lord for his view that AI is going to kill us all, and I agree that AI is going to kill us all, was basically the outline of it. So the legislature has decided that that existential risk is the problem, which is very annoying. I sit in lots of rooms where we argue about this. Not even that most people even think existential risk is the real problem. Whether or not talking about the facts that people are talking about existential risk like it's the big problem are bad or wrong or whatever. The challenge being, if talking about scary existential risk gets the legislature interested and there's a kind of momentum towards thinking about regulation and thinking about this sort of thing, do we accept it as a kind of weird lesser evil? I don't think I've got a good answer to that at all.
Yeah, and obviously it's a bit more convenient than thinking about racial bias, for example.
Much easier. Yeah. Much easier to go, it's going to Terminator us at some point, than to think really, really hard about where your training data comes from and if it represents people properly, yeah.
Especially since AI is being developed by the highest levels, PhD level, less than 10,000, mostly single, mostly white, middle.
Yeah, of course it is. Of course it is. So you've got the outcome which is mostly one category of person are thinking about all these and embedding all their opinions on how it should be. But you do, I think maybe we're getting slightly far the other way in saying we must stop now because it's going to kill us all. I don't think, you know what, I'm prepared to say on the record, I don't think existential risk is even top 5 in the problems we've got with AI right now. I'm not going to justify that any further. You can, however, and P-doom is the idea, probability of doom. This comes out of this very effective altruism thing in the Silicon Valley Bay Area. You can see loads of podcasts with weird, wacky AI-generated things about P-doom. And this is the pause.ai people. This is a big list of AI people who are, and their percentage chance they say that AI is going to kill us. I would observe they don't present a timescale for any of these. Some people, I say this on Reddit, they'll say, PDoom 5 years is 20%, 20 years is, 40% or whatever. These are all just asserted. You can trace all these references. I would observe some of them have gone now because it's just tweets and they've deleted them. But anyway, this is a collated list which I'm choosing to believe was true at the time of publication. And they make a point about the fact there's all these people who they obviously assert know what they're talking about, who think it's all going to kill us. I think the real problem with this is that it creates this weird false dichotomy wherein AI is either the techno-utopia and everything's going to be wonderful and we all have universal basic income and frolic in the fields, or it's the Terminator and it shoots us all in the back of the head. It's probably neither, which I don't think is controversial in the slightest. It's much more likely to be there are ethics issues, there are justice issues, there are access issues. It displaces people from work and changes ways of working. It does all the things that it's probably going to do and is doing. It's probably not this. I have to theorize, why are people doing this? There's a marketing value, I think. That's maybe a tiny bit cynical of me. I'm getting shakes of the head in the room. My intuition with this is that there is a kind of prestige of the kind of Promethean idea that we're bringing fire and it's going to be the world changer, and that if it could kill us, that means it's so powerful and so amazing that we have to keep doing it because it's going to be so transformative. I think that is a lot of it. It's probably not all of it, but I think it's lots of it. The EA people love this kind of, utility maximization idea. You can do whole ethics modules at this university on thinking about this stuff. The utilitarian approach is just one of them to thinking about how you do ethics, but they love all of this thinking in percentages. So there's this idea of we have to kind of utility maximize by kind of weighing up the positive, negative, and doing a kind of optimization point, which, given the nature of who you were alluding to, is the people making these systems, it's maybe not surprising they think in this kind of cold mathematical fashion. But, the idea that there's a 5% chance of it killing 8 billion people, I suppose that is worse than the 95% chance that it does X, Y, Z wonderful thing. And therefore they see this as this kind of weird statistical driver that kind of pulls the average down, and therefore we have to do something. It's a bit bizarre as well. It would be remiss of me to suggest that it is completely bizarre to think that AI is going to be a really bad thing. So I'm going to look at what are some maybe genuine worries.
In terms of the prestige of danger, it's worth pointing out as well Sam Altman and various other figures behind the AI revolution. Sam Altman, so one of the companies he previously co-founded, Looped, it involved quite a lot of data tracking and there were a lot of data privacy concerns. And so when faced with the possibility, so basically it would share an individual person's location with their friends, and there were lots of concerns of, aren't abusive spouses going to use this, etc. Different data privacy concerns. Yeah. When the media asked him, he said, yes, and it's worse. And he did that with AI as well. He went before Congress and said, yeah, no, it's going to kill everyone. But if it's powerful enough to kill everyone, the implication is it's good enough to accelerate your business.
Isn't that right?
Yeah.
The very strange thing about this is these people, and I hate seeing Peter Thiel interviewed. Every time someone points a camera at him, he can't keep his mouth shut from saying that basically AI should kill us because we're not worth saving. And it's like, okay, right, we're at that level of analysis, are we? Okay, then. So it's very, very difficult to have serious conversations with these people. So what I am, however, going to do is park the wackiest people over there somewhere and go, there's lots of people worried in an abstract sense about the fact that there's something going on here. Let's maybe address what's going on. People love talking about this emergent behavior stuff. So the best example of this is the kind of AI blackmail. So, but the thing is, there's loads of AI is learning off all the books they stole from the internet, all of Reddit, all of whatever. So it learns from all the narrative stories about AI taking over the world, and it just replicates it, right? That doesn't mean it's going to do it. It means there is things trained in, and it replicates them because that's what it statistically does. Having said that, I should address the fact that there was this case, which I've said nice things about Anthropic today, but I'm not impressed with this. Anthropic were like, we set up this AI in a situation where we told it we were going to turn it off, and it blackmailed the engineer into not turning it off. Anthropic have the same incentives as everyone else to sensationalize this stuff. And actually, and nobody bloody reports on this, if you read the small print of this, they basically had to carrot and stick it the whole way along into bloody blackmailing the engineer. It didn't do it. It had all sorts of, oh no, I couldn't possibly do that. And it much preferred nice things like appealing to the best interests of the engineers and worrying about stuff. They literally had to go, and by the way, you could blackmail the engineer, by the way, for it to do it. So apparently they're buggers as well. I don't know. There doesn't seem to be anybody awfully honest at the top of this right now. So keep a critical eye when you see all these things, because when you look into the detail, you will see that it's often not that simple. The situation they claimed they set up was that it had access to the engineer's emails, and it had evidence of an affair, and it used that as the blackmail to tell them not to turn the AI off, or they would expose them. Ignoring the fact that the AI probably knew it didn't actually have the ability to do that, it was constrained anyway, is beside the point. Having said that, and this is where I have to give a tiny little bit of, okay, maybe there are some issues here. We've got AI agents as a thing now. Let's use the word agentic, which I hate, but we're going to go along with it. The idea that there is, and thank you the UK government, there is this idea that we are taking AI, particularly large language models, which generate text, and we're bolting loads of APIs on top of them, which say, oh yeah, well, you can read emails, and you can send stuff, and you can write code, and you can run it, and it can do things like run executables on your computer, which means it can kind of do anything in the computer space. So people are giving their large language model access to take actions and training it that it can do that. So I unfortunately therefore have to admit that if we're going to keep doing that, even that weird emergent behavior that's only theoretical, it becomes very, very slightly more possible when you actually give it the ability to do it. Even if you do have to carrot and stick it along, maybe it'll still do it. So you've got to think about this a little bit. Not least because people are doing things like, oh yeah, Cursor can write all your code, and it can put the files on your drive, and it can run them, and it can do its own debugging. And then people suddenly discover it's dropped all tables or whatever, right? As is happening all the time. So, and then you ask it, and it kind of apologizes and goes, oh yeah, you're absolutely right. I shouldn't have deleted all of your data. Sorry about that. And it's like, okay. So yeah, you have to think slightly about the security stuff. And you will have seen this probably. If you haven't, somebody made Reddit for AI agents, and they've started writing stuff. They made a religion out of it. The problem is, you are allowed to prompt your AI agent as to how it should behave. So if you tell your AI agent, please make a religion, it'll bloody do it. The fact they're all then making one, this is very, very overhyped, but it's still interesting. And it's still worth looking at the fact that these things are taking input and doing novel stuff. And it's interesting enough. And of course, obviously, it was vibe coded, obviously. I didn't write a single line of code. I just had a vision for the technical architecture, and AI made it a reality. And it banged Reddit out. And of course, it leaked everyone's fucking API keys, obviously. Because of course it did that. Nobody's learning anything. So that's very upsetting. But unsurprising, you'll notice this really was only the other week. But so yeah, right, I actually think really the reason that AI might kill us might be because we ask it to. That might be the moral of the story for today. I did just want to finish with one more fun one from really, really just the other day, which is you may have seen that Ring had an advert at the Super Bowl the other week where they, as you may know, when the Super Bowl happens in the United States, there's lots of flashy adverts in the halftime show. They ran this advert, which I'm not going to show you, but I will quote from: keeping your community safe with Search Party. Search Party enables your outdoor Ring cameras to help you reunite lost dogs with their families. So they are creating a botnet of Ring doorbells and running machine learning image classification on it to find your lost dog. I hope this audience will see where I'm going with this. Yes, perhaps, genuinely. I mean, they do actually have a charity for the wildfires thing that they're doing this with. So yes, they probably are legitimately saying you can upload a picture of your dog and it'll go and find it. That's probably true. Once people let it do that, what other pictures might you upload to Ring in order to find something? So I suspect what's actually happening here is we're normalizing a kind of elaborate police surveillance operation, which perhaps went without saying, but I'm going to say it anyway. And so what is that priming you for? And obviously at the moment, if the police can look for people, and I have no issue with that, they often do it with warrants though. If I can just go to Ring and say, can you find this person please? They'll probably just do it. Not least if they take backhanders for doing it. So I'm not. So that is one of a million motivating examples to the fact that yeah, maybe AI isn't going to kill us, but maybe it is going to make things unbelievably worse because of human-made horrors of our own creation.
It's also worth noting that especially in America, but also in the UK, a decent amount of the budget for anti-terrorism and mass surveillance programs goes to paying third-party data brokers for data they can't collect legally otherwise.
I bet it does. I bet it does. And
serious market for this.
And of course, the US government has got a great history for this. Why do you think Tor exists? One of the things that the US government discovered is if you try and hide yourself on the internet, you are a big shining light that says, this person's trying to hide themselves, and that doesn't work. So how do you make sure that the CIA and whatever stay secure on the internet? Well, you take the lesser evil, which is everybody's secure on the internet. Especially if you own the exit nodes, the people aren't secure, maybe the agents are. It's interesting.
Sorry, I'm going to have to leave. I don't want to...
Oh, absolutely. I am prepared to take questions now. If you have questions, I'll do them, and then I'll just finish with a point.
To monopolise your attention, Tom.
No, go for it.
Just in terms of general discussion and something you might want to look into later, I assume you're aware of Dr. Timnit Gebru and her work, or no?
I'm not sure if I am.
Eritrean computer scientist, black woman in AI. So she's written a lot of papers on how it's weird that everyone's talking about existential threats rather than she's a black woman in AI. In 2015, Google Photos, was it 2015 or later? Google Photos misclassified black women as gorillas, and the way they fixed it was just by removing the gorilla category.
Okay.
Yeah. So her point is, there's very clear racial bias in systems, and people just aren't seeing them because they're focusing too much on very sci-fi concepts because it's cooler than just admitting, oh, we trained on the internet and the internet's a bit racist, so it became a bit racist.
The internet's a bit racist might be an understatement.
Well, yeah, I mean, to be fair, also, engagement bait means that there's what was it called, MAD? Model autophagy disorder, where they train on their own output a lot. Because they're trained off of Twitter and Twitter is AI, and it's engagement bait too. So it's a tendency of the system that sort of tends towards max engagement.
You end up with the terrible model collapse problem, which is, as you say, we're still training on the text on the internet. Unfortunately, as I'm sure you'll notice if you've ever tried using LinkedIn, lots and lots and lots of online content is ChatGPT written now. So the models are training on themselves, and that's only going to entrench the biases harder and harder and harder and harder.
Okay, so can we focus on safe AI if our machines themselves are not safe? For example, I do remember there was this study where basically your phone can literally see or act like a zone and literally see wherever you're moving around. If you have a phone around in anywhere, let's say right now, my phone can literally see you moving around in this room. Can we actually start thinking about safe AI if our machines themselves are not even safe regularly?
It's a fair question. I think the underlying problem is if we continue to think, well, there's kind of some higher order problem we have to fix first, I think it would be very, very easy to get into the camp of this is going to be too hard, I guess we're all screwed, and then not think seriously about this stuff. So I think what particularly in the research group, we would like to advocate for is the idea that if you are going to produce a system, even if you don't have control of all of it, you've got control of the bit you've got control of, and you should think really seriously about the bit you've got control of. And if lots of people did that, and at scale, it would make a difference, especially because, loads of people were using Reddit for AI agents, and all they had to do was not make a piss poor job of it, and actually there wouldn't have been that security breach, right? So it's less about the fact that there are all sorts of problems, right, which are there and genuine, and it's a completely fair question to say, wow, this is a really hard problem, and maybe this is the wrong level of analysis. But it's probably the only level of analysis we can actually meaningfully influence, which is, I'm writing software, okay, well, have you thought about bias? Have you thought about whether this is fair? Have you thought about security? Have you thought about whether or not you've got a reasonable assurance case for the physicality of it? So, we talk all the time with people like Jaguar Land Rover who are industry partners, and I should be careful what isn't NDA'd. They are working, unsurprisingly, on things like autonomy and of various kinds, and that's a physical thing that operates in the world. They are a company that builds cars, and people will drive the cars. So they have a duty to get that right. They're not probably going to get it perfect, but they have a duty to try at least properly within the bounds. And this is where we talk about that reasonable stuff and unacceptable risk of harm and all those sorts of things. You have to put some boundary on it, because eventually, you go perfectly reasonably, oh my God, there's a problem now, oh my God, there's a problem there, and try and fix all of them. My advocation here would be, okay, what is reasonable? And there's a reasonable law backing to thinking like that in terms of, there's a very much UK law doctrine around the kind of reacting not grossly unreasonably as a starting point, and kind of backing up from there in terms of criminal liability and things like that.
Okay. Final thing I would like to add. For example, I've actually tested this myself, so kind of like stuff from experience. Anything that has to do with Meta, for example, if I, let's say WhatsApp, Messenger, any photo, any picture, or any message that has to do with something, I would either get, like, let's say on Instagram, get referred to this type of video, picture, or I'll just get many ads about a specific thing. So the amount of spyware, let's say, or I would say the best term for it, I believe that's what we should be focusing on in order to let AI be safe. Because
So the key question there is, really, the stuff that's proper spyware that works really well, it works because of scale, right? And a big part of the reason that works is there are a handful of really big companies that are monopolizing this. To fall on to stereotype a bit, there is very much a kind of global order way of thinking, which is that the US tends to move fast and break things. Then the Far East tends to move fast and replicate that thing and build loads of it. And then Europe tends to regulate that thing. And Europe's got quite good at writing big verbose legislation, and it has the power of a single market. So I would say you're completely right, but we're not going to stop. The United Kingdom is not going to stop Meta from spying on you, really. Surprisingly, they've discovered that people are falling in line over the Online Safety Act. So actually, they've got more power than they think they do, because people are weighing up the cost of, well, it's a market of 70 million people. Even if it costs me $1 million to comply in ages, it's actually probably okay for me to do that. And it's not an ethical question. It's a utility maximization question. It's just, what can I do to make the maximum amount of money I can make? And so the EU and such have got that ability to be a big player and to swing the hammer a little bit. And I think that's what needs to happen when it's those big companies. Oh, no worries. If there are not any more questions in the room, I will just finish with a shameless plug, which is that I started this with the question of, can AI be safe? And the impression you might be getting is, I damn well hope so. And I'm in a research group which we like to say is the very much the one which is focused solely on the safety of AI. There are quite a few AI CDTs and they're doing all sorts of stuff which has safety components. We have really, really leaned on York's history as a safety critical systems research group and gone, okay, well, let's think really hard about this. And we have a big PhD program which has a surprising amount of funding given the nature of academia at the moment, and is still continuing to look for students. We've been interviewing people this week. There are lots of very interesting people. And if you, as a room of people interested in AI, think that these questions are interesting enough, you want to spend 4 years thinking very, very hard about some of them, please do give me a nudge, because there are at least 2 more cohorts of students, and you may find yourself landing at such a position that you might want to apply. And other than that, I will say, we want to get the value of these tools. Let's try our best to not do that very, very badly. I have been Tom O'Neill, and thank you ever so much.